So for 3.1, this word assumption, alright, is something that you're going to have to be quite accurate with. So we had that definition, but basically it's a belief that is not necessarily backed up by evidence. Okay, or it's a perception, it's how we perceive things. And it's usually something that's society-wide. So an example of that, champions are born, not made. Okay, so the talent versus nature versus nurture myth around, debate around our champions. It could be that there's another assumption is there's girl sports and boy sports. Okay, are two examples. So I'm going to pick on this one here because there was somebody who wrote something about this where they identified an assumption, but they weren't quite accurate. So the personal example this person used was, I was excluded or not picked or felt whakamā or ashamed to play touch because I could not step. This was when they were in primary school, I think. Alright? So, and they've gone, the assumption is that I couldn't play this game because of these things. Alright? That's more of a personal example as an example of this. Does that make sense? Alright? So what they were saying really is, in their mindset, is I won't play a game unless I'm naturally gifted at that game. Does that make sense? Yep.
Yeah.
Which, there's lots of different things that have gone on in the past and etc, where that assumption has come to be in our society. Does that make sense? Yep. So, there's a lot of research which is coming out now, which is a great Herald article, series, which was written last year on how to raise a sports champion, and it goes through all of the things that athlete who succeeds at their sport is likely to need as they grow up or as they develop. So what you would do in that task 1B is say one of the assumptions that has impacted on my physical activity is that champions are born and not made, or the nature versus nurture debate. Full stop. An example of this is, bang, you bring that in there, okay? And then you say, however, research says, and then you start to pull list of bits. Does that make sense? And then finally, at the end, you make your judgment, okay, so moving forward, now that I've examined this assumption, what am I now going to do to make sure that that assumption doesn't impact my physical activity? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So just to make that clear, that's what an assumption is for 3.1. Now all the way through when I'm giving you feedback, I'll try and identify those assumptions for you, not to say you have to do them, but say, hey, there's a nice little assumption there. For example, I think it was either Daniel, I think it was Chris, so I identified a couple. In fact, most people have identified a couple where you say you might want to consider this. Okay? All good? Thank you. Go back to